When we talk about communication in intimate relationships, romantic partners, friends, coworkers, family, we talk as if it was just a matter of getting information out. People talk about talking to each other, listening to each other. That's right. That's a part of it. But a big part of what happens in communication, the only thing we can call it is misunderstanding or not connecting or talking past each other. Hey, we're human beings. It's going to happen. I have different assumptions. I have different histories. I have different training. So do you. We grow up in different family cultures and geographies and ethnic cultures. And there's going to be communication trouble. There's no way to avoid it. I say a lot in this work that communication depends on what the listener hears. That's absolutely true too. In my video on reflective listening, that entire tool is about making sure that the listener understands what the speaker is saying. It's fundamental. But the problem with communication isn't just listening. It's also what gets in the way of listening. And if there was an enemy of communication more than any other thing, it's defensiveness. And that's what today's video is about, is how do you get around defensiveness when you're trying to have a serious conversation? Well, you first have to understand that listening is at the center. And if listening is at the center and defensiveness is the chief enemy of listening, then you've got to address why you're getting defensive. What is it that's provoking a defensive response in you? Everybody's been through it. You're in a conversation, things are going good, and suddenly your hackles go up, the hairs on the back of your neck. You get that kind of clenched feeling in your stomach. Now you're irritated or frustrated or angry or hurt or whatever reaction you've had, and you begin to move towards what you might call a defensive posture. You're now on the defensive. You may not be aware of it. You might be only kind of aware of it. You might be completely aware that you're defensive. But the moment that happens, communication begins to suffer. Well, what's going on? Why are we defensive? That's a conversation for another video. But the point is acknowledging and recognizing that we're defensive and the various flavors of emotions that come with defensive. There's a host of issues that happen when we get defensive, create real problems. One is we begin to shut down listening. Why do we do that? Because, well, we're starting to feel like we're under attack. And if you feel like you're under attack, you're going to start being defensive. You're going to start listening for the other person coming at you or criticizing you or putting you down or making fun of what you're saying or not caring. Lots of things you could do. But you're not listening the same way that you're listening when you're not defensive. That by itself is a big problem. Part of what happens as a result of that is it begins to turn into a competition. I have to now make my point, tell you what's happened to me, focus on how I'm feeling, prove that I'm right. And there's a time and a place in those conversations to get clear on what happened to you, what happened with them maybe. But the problem is when it shifts to a competition, when it shifts to being proven right or defending yourself, now communication is really in trouble. I could be saying all the right things as the person that provoked your defensiveness, but now that you're defensive, you're not hearing it, or you're only hearing part of it, or you're only hearing the parts that feel critical. This puts us in a much less empathetic place. We're now in a much more tentative position to be aware of what's happening with the other person. We're not being empathetic because we're defending ourselves. All makes sense. And maybe worst, we tend to retreat to a position where we're waiting for the other person to make the first move. Hey, I'm defensive. You know, if you'll apologize to me, I might get less defensive. If you'll say I'm sorry, or you'll explain why you said that hurtful thing, or whatever's happening with us, it becomes way less interactive and much more, I'm going to wait until you make the first move. Well, that's a cycle. That just makes communication problems increase. I see it all the time in my work coaching with couples around conflict. And you can point to months, years, decades of defensiveness where the two people involved couldn't get past their own defenses to have the conversations they need. Okay, that's bad. There's no other way to say it. And I'll make this statement again. Defensiveness is the chief enemy of communication. So what do we do about it? Well, Part of it is understanding what's happening. Something got provoked in us, a concern, a worry, a sense of failure, a sense of criticism, and our shields went up. Another way to describe that is flight or fight was provoked. Hopefully I don't have to explain flight or fight, although I do in other videos that are coming. Flight or fight is that mechanism that keeps us safe from real physical danger, to either run away from it or if we have to, fight until the danger is done. Well, that's one thing out in the wild facing hungry coyotes. It's something else entirely when we're talking to our romantic partner, our best friend, our boss, our mom or dad, because flight or fight, again, is the reaction to needing to defend ourselves. We feel like we're under attack, so we go into flight or fight. Well, all kinds of things happen, like I said. But we want to be aware that we are now in a defensive posture. This is the most important piece. Being able to detect, begin to see when we've stepped into a defensive position. That's not hard to tell. Most of us have physical reactions. Most of us have emotional reactions, anger, sadness, worry, tight stomach, tight chest, a little bit sweaty, tingling hands. There's all kinds of warning signals that flight or fight has started. We need to de-escalate. We have to get out of that defensive posture. Well, there's a lot of ways we can do that. In a video that's already up here at YouTube, I talk about reflective listening. It might be the most useful tool we have. That takes a little bit of practice and work because to start reflective listening in a defensive position initially can be challenging. Again, we're not trying to communicate, we're trying to defend ourselves. But reflective listening can very quickly help us get out of a defensive position, especially if the people involved have even a tiny bit of skill at doing it. So that's the first recommendation. But if you're not quite there, and that doesn't take long, take a break. Every sports team on the planet, except soccer for some reason, takes breaks. You can call a timeout. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give to couples is call a timeout. If the conversation's gone sideways, if you're talking past each other, if voices are getting raised and now you can't talk and you've been shouting at each other or swearing at each other, whatever's going on, call a timeout. Step away from the fight. Now, this is different from walking away from the fight. Some of us get agitated and we just leave the room. And for every person that does that, there's another person that chases the person out of the room trying to continue the conversation. I'm saying consciously, deliberately, say, you know what, I need a few minutes. Take 10 minutes, take 15 minutes. That number may seem very low to some of you that are watching because you want like 4 days or 2 weeks. But I'm saying call a short break, like you might call in a sporting event, football, basketball, baseball, and then come back to the conversation and start again. But now de-escalated, less defensive, less agitated. Another tool is to remember what it is you're trying to accomplish. What's this conversation for? You know, when you're in a relationship of any kind, the mission is to communicate. Well, if you're defensive, you're only communicating defensiveness. So it can be very helpful to remember, okay, why did we start this conversation? What is it we're trying to accomplish? And notice the use of the word we. What are we trying to accomplish? Defensiveness makes it every person for themselves. I defend myself, you defend yourself. It's not a collaborative activity, but communication is collaborative. And the mission is to remember, why are we talking about this stuff in the first place? If we were talking about the kids and got in a fight about the kids, what was the original point of talking about the kids? If we're arguing about finances and it's gotten defensive and explosive, what was the original mission? To talk about finances? Last recommendation for today is to remember that this is a short-term problem. And this is another video subject, but a lot of people in the West, America, parts of Europe, lots of East Asia, etc., see conflict as universally bad. If you're in a fight, things have failed. That's not true. But not to get down that particular rabbit hole today, any fight is a short-term activity. If we're having a conflict right now, it doesn't spell the end of civilization. It just means you guys reached a place where you got defensive. To see it as a short-term problem, okay, you know what we're fighting? Maybe we should do some listening. Maybe we should step away for a few minutes. Maybe we should remember what the heck we were talking about in the first place, and to see it as a small piece of the experience, that it's not forever. This fight's not going to last forever, and especially if we choose not to have it go on forever. 4 recommendations to help get you out of a defensive posture. remembering that the chief enemy of communication is defensiveness. Thanks.